We have a terrific panel on energy themed issues, and we have a great moderator for that panel. Steve Weissman has had a distinguished career in public service, primarily and most recently as a senior administrative law judge with the California Public Utilities Commission. He has taught energy law as an adjunct instructor here at Bolt Hall and at the Vermont Law School for several years. And as I alluded to earlier in the conference, as of 2 months ago, we were delighted to recruit Steve to be our new Associate Director of the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy, who will be running our energy project, which reflects a strong emphasis and rededication to energy law and policy issues. So one of Steve's early assignments in that new role is to moderate our panel, and I'm happy to turn it over to him. Steve?
Thank you, Rick. I don't think there's a whole lot of debate at this point about the role that energy plays in the challenges we're facing in terms of climate change at this point. But California actually didn't wait for the onset of public concern about climate change before it started manifesting leadership in the areas of energy efficiency and renewable energy development. Starting in the late 70s, the Commission, California Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission developed energy efficiency programs for the utilities. There were efforts to change the way rates were designed to discourage excessive consumption of electricity and natural gas. The utilities' revenues were decoupled from their sales so that the utilities didn't have a perverse incentive to try to sell more than they had to in order to earn a return on their investments. There was an exceptional early push for renewable energy development in California, even before the federal government established requirements for utilities to buy renewable energy output from private developers. And there was solar financing and solar rebate programs that occurred years ago. Well, where we are now is that California has a lot of experience, and the programs are ramped up to an extremely significant extent, and you're going to hear about that today from a couple of our very distinguished panel members. But the other factor has been efforts within the state to make the use of transportation fuels more efficient. The federalist system that we function under has made that a challenge for states in many respects. The conversation is changing in that regard as well at this point. We're now going to fairly significantly move from the transportation fuels sector into the world of energy utilities and talk about energy efficiency programs and renewable energy programs through utility regulation. And we could hardly have better people here to talk about that today. We'll start out with Commissioner Diane Greenwich from the California Public Utilities Commission. Commissioner Grueneich was appointed to the PUC by Governor Schwarzenegger in January of 2005. But perhaps even more importantly, has spent a career of being involved in this very field and came into the PUC definitely on the ground and running. Commissioner Grueneich is the lead commissioner on energy efficiency issues. He's also very actively involved in renewable energy issues and in climate change matters at the PUC. I won't run down the list of all of her national and international affiliations, especially with the energy efficiency issue, but let me emphasize that she's a member of the National Energy Efficiency Leadership Group. She's a former board member of the American Council for Energy Efficiency, an Energy Efficient Economy, and is past president of the California League of Conservation Voters. Please join me in welcoming Diane Greenwich.
Down there. Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here today. I'm going to start off with what to me is frankly a scary number, but I'm going to provide some direct continuity to what you just heard from Alex. Earlier this week, I spoke at a green building summit in Sacramento, and one of my co-speakers was Mary Nichols, who is head of the California Air Resources Board and truly the czar in California on where we're going to go with AB 32 and addressing climate change. here are the facts that she gave us on Monday. The average per capita carbon usage in California is about 14 tons of carbon emissions annually per person. Under our global warming law here in California, we are required to have the overall emissions for the state, which includes out-of-state power plant usage for California. Our 2020 emissions have to be at the level of where we were in 1990, and that includes population growth. And what Mary did was she translated that to say by 2020 then, we have to go from an average carbon diet of 14 tons per year per person to 10 tons per year per person. So that means each and every one of us is going to be thinking, and frankly, in some way required, to be going on to what is a pretty dramatic change. But then she went on to say, under our global warming law, we are required by 2050 to have our emissions, and this is Alex, you can probably say it correctly, at 80% of the 1990 levels?
That's right.
Did I say that? 80% of the 1990 levels by 2050. Again, we're not allowed in a carbon-constrained world to say, well, we get some extra points because of population growth. It has to remain constant. And what she said was that translates into the average carbon diet that we are each allowed is 1 ton per person. So think about this world. 14 tons average per person now, 2020, 10 tons, and we're looking at, in a world of 2050, 1 ton per person. I'm a little bit older than, I'd say, a lot of the people here. I have kids, so I'm probably by that stage, I'll barely be in my walker, so I'll be about the 1 ton per person no matter what. But I'm dealing with what is the world that I am leaving my children, because they will be alive in 2050, and they're going to have grown up knowing the world in which we live in, and then making that leap to the world that they're going to have to live in. That is the challenge that we all collectively face. And that is why all of us are so adamant about addressing this, because there's no magic bullet. I spend a lot of time, as does Alex, as does many other people, not just thinking about and talking about these issues here in California, but nationally and internationally. And in many things in life, there's somebody else who's figured it out, and what we need is just the political will to go there. This truly is an area where it has not yet been figured out. So I will say on now the positive note for all the students out there and the attorneys, and I am an attorney, this is a great area for making, well, I should say for doing a lot of work. Whether you make a lot of money, of course, is up to you. But this is truly a growth industry for lawyers. It's a growth industry for lots and lots of things, for technology, for workforce development. But I truly believe this is the single most pressing issue that we will all address. So I hope by your attention and your participation in this conference, it means that you will become part of the literally thousands, hundreds of thousands, and frankly around the world, millions of people who are going to have to get engaged and take a leadership role in whatever capacity makes sense to address this issue. So let me quickly now do the run-through of what's the world of energy policy in California. The good news is that in addition to me, my colleague Karen Douglas, Commissioner with the California Energy Commission, we are working very consistently together, the 2 major state energy agencies in California. I'll give the quick 50,000 level overview, and I'm sure that Karen will be filling in with more details on some of the areas that I haven't missed or haven't put much detail in. We have in California a document. It's available on my agency's website, on Karen's agency's website, the Energy Action Plan 2. The good news is this was fully vetted through hearings. Both commissions have formally adopted this. It's been approved by the governor's office. But if you, in anything you do, want to know sort of what's the game plan for energy efficiency in California, we have a short document, I think it's less than 50 pages, that you can read and actually know what we're trying to accomplish. We have been very clear in this document as well as in other documents, and I think it's reflected in state laws and certainly in our implementing decisions, that we have something called the loading order. And that is, how do we make our decisions? What is the policy direction? The number one resource that we go after in California in the energy world is energy efficiency and its sort of sister approach, which is demand response. And this is something that governs all of our decisions, whether we're talking about a CEQA review, whether we're talking about a power plant, whether we're talking about how to look at expenditures from my viewpoint of utilities. It's where we first of all say, let's get all cost-effective energy efficiency that we can. Next is renewable generation. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then the final one is the cleanest available fossil fuels. And under my agency's approach, any of the procurement by the investor-owned utilities in California, which are Pacific Gas and Electric Company, Southern California Edison Company, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Southern California Gas. So it excludes the municipal utilities, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. They are municipally owned. We do not regulate them. They do their own local regulation. But all of the utility procurement and actions must abide by this loading order. So I'm going to talk a little bit about number one, energy efficiency. As Steve said, I'm sort of the kid in the candy shop. I'm lead commissioner on energy efficiency. If you have to pick, you know, the best prime assignment to be doing in a world of climate change, let me tell you, energy efficiency is the one to choose. I luckily don't have to do what Alex has to do, which is, oh my God, what are we going to do with the transportation system? That one, I've got tough things, but it's not even close to what you have to do with transportation. Here is what we have adopted in California at my agency for the investor-owned utilities who currently are providing about 90% of the energy efficiency savings in California. We have set long-term goals because, again, if you think about that you're going to use energy efficiency on a large scale to avoid building power plants, to avoid building transmission lines, you have to have a game plan. You have to say, where are we trying to go year by year and cumulatively with the energy efficiency, and then you have to measure it, and then you have to think of the funding, and it has to be part of a whole program. But the start is, what are the goals? What are the short-term and long-term goals? So we have established these goals. You're talking about looking at out through 2013 by avoiding 5,000 megawatts of what we call peak demand. And you can see up here that translates into avoiding the need for 10 new power plants, eliminating 9 million tons of carbon by the 2013 year, and $10 billion in net savings. This is why my life, frankly, in the world of energy efficiency is so easy, because you can sell energy efficiency. It makes sense to do energy efficiency either for reliability, it helps keep the lights on, because of the environment, that it has tremendous opportunities. Obviously, it's the number one solution that we and everybody else I know that's dealing with climate change is looking to. But frankly, the economics are great. The statistic is that on average, for every dollar you invest in energy efficiency, you save $2 by not having to build more expensive power plants, more expensive transmission lines. In California, under our current suite of programs with the investor-owned utilities, through a small charge on rates, we are running the world's largest energy efficiency program. It is currently about $1 billion a year that our agency has put in place through a small charge on rates, and this is collected, and then it is administered by our investor-owned utilities and overseen by our agency. That $1 billion a year is generating $2 billion a year in savings. $1 billion of the $2 billion goes to pay for the costs of the programs. It helps pay for rebates. If you go and buy a new efficient refrigerator, you generally can get something back, either from a mail-in coupon or from the local utility. If you're building a major new commercial building in California and you're in an IOU service area, you generally can get, at free of cost, some expert assistance on how do you design a super smart building, all sorts of ways that you can get services. And this is where that $1 billion a year is going. But as I said, you're saving $2 billion. So there's another $1 billion that each and every year in California we're just keeping in the California economy. And that is something that we need, not just to have a very vibrant, healthy economy, but we're going to need more and more as we're looking at, frankly, paying some of the higher costs of all the other suites of measures we're going to have to take on addressing climate change. So I won't go through all of the details, but once you get into the world of energy efficiency, there's a lot of items that need to be thought through. One is a mechanism called decoupling. If you think about it logically, if your utilities are the main mechanism for developing energy efficiency, which typically is a lot of the approach that is used, utilities, like every other business I know, generally makes their money by selling more of a product. They charge a certain amount per kWh, a certain amount per therms of gas that you use. Well, energy efficiency doesn't want the utility to sell more. It, in fact, wants the utility to sell less. So you have to decouple utility profits from the amount of sales that they do. And this is a mechanism called decoupling. In California, we've had it from 1982. For the majority of that time, we were viewed as just as flaky in that area as everything else California does. I do a lot of work nationally on energy efficiency, and it was like, what are you guys doing? But literally in the last 2-3 years, we are seeing just about every state start to take a look at decoupling. We're seeing more and more states adopt it because they realize you can't be serious about energy efficiency unless you look at the profit. I mean, we're talking about people don't do these things if they're going to lose money. The other thing we did is in October of last year, our agency put in place what we call the risk-reward mechanism, where if the utilities meet our goals on energy efficiency, we actually allow them to earn a profit, that we will pay a profit that goes directly to utility shareholders. This, I think, is among the most innovative approaches that we've seen, but we also have in place a penalty. If the utilities don't meet our goals, then they will, from the shareholder pockets, pay ratepayers a penalty, because we take energy efficiency seriously in California. If we're not doing energy efficiency, we're having to build power plants, we're having to build transmission lines, and we want the utilities to know that's not a no-cost choice to be making. So here's just quickly the track record. It's successful. We have documentation that the bottom line is California, basically pretty much straight through our efforts in energy efficiency. The sad tale is the rest of the country, where you're looking at a very significant increase. That is not something that had to have happened. It's a tremendous amount of carbon that's been emitted through just, frankly, a failure at both the state and national level. But we are seeing some dramatic changes, at least at the state level, in where they're going with energy efficiency. This is a breakdown. As I said, one of the major areas are the utility efficiency programs, but equally significant are the programs adopted and implemented by the California Energy Commission, Karen Douglas's agency, which adopts the state's building standards as well as the appliance standards. I'm going to just quickly run through. We decided last year we're doing great on energy efficiency, but if we're going to address carbon, we need to go way beyond what we're doing. So we have addressed, and we have a little brochure that we'll make available if you want to know more about it. We try to be an agency where you can actually understand us. I know for the lawyers here, it's like, wait a minute, this is a decision from an agency, and it's not actually the decision, but it's the summary of it, and it's trying to actually make it clear what we do as an agency. But among the things that we're doing are some big, bold strategies. One is air conditioning. We have to change how air conditioning is done in the state. It's a major driver of new power plants. And the bottom two that you see here are a whole concept of getting to zero net energy. So I'm happy to say, Alex, right, we passed the test. We put in the word zero. And this is something that's great that the Energy Commission has also adopted that as its goal, so we're able to be working together. It is to get all new commercial buildings to zero net energy, which is basically building them as super efficient as you can, and that can get you to 50–60% of your savings, and then looking at what can you do in terms of passive solar or solar photovoltaic or other renewable type measures. So this is for the new commercial buildings by 2030, new homes in California, zero net energy by 2020. For both of these, the way that we actually thought about this is we came to understand what's happening internationally. And that's one of the things I wanted to say is that more and more, if you are going to be successful in doing environmental work, energy work, climate work, you have to understand what's going on in the rest of the world. Because we really, as Alex said, I said so eloquently, it's so intertwined to understand what's going on. I had the opportunity to go to Europe in the summer of 2007 to specifically talk with officials and businesses and NGOs about energy efficiency. And that's when I learned that the UK had a goal of getting to zero net homes by 2016. And I came back and said, well, if the UK can do it by 2016, we should do it by 2020. And we held a bunch of workshops and hearings. And lo and behold, we emerged with that's where we're going. I since have learned that the UK is now trying to get their homes zero net energy by 2013. So we're going to be seeing if we can move a little bit faster. Just quickly, demand response is basically when you look at the hottest times of the day, the hottest times of the year, you want to try and bring the usage down because that's typically when you may end up building power plants just to serve those few hours in the year. And so we have all sorts of programs that are really trying to address this peak load. We also have something at the bottom called the Advanced Metering Initiatives, and we've approved it for 2 of the utilities. We'll be probably approving the 3rd program this later year, and it's basically changing the entire system in California so that everybody, individual customers and multifamily dwellings and businesses have advanced meters so we can start taking advantage of all the great new technology and innovation that's developing. It is a state law that we have to have our renewable portfolio standard, which translates into 20% renewables by 2010. But if we are going to get to the type of carbon world we're talking about, we know that this is essentially a down payment on where we need to be going with the use of renewables in our system. So I'm not going to try and go through all of the details on this, but this is an area of very, very heavy focus. There's a whole initiative going on called READY, the Renewable Energy Transmission Initiative, because the basic issue is that many of our renewable resources, wind, central station solar, are in remote areas. And in order to access them, you have to build major new transmission lines to bring them to where people are and businesses are. And this requires a lot of thinking, working with shareholders, figuring out where are the best areas to go out and develop those resources, what are the best ways to have the routing going on. So I, with the Energy Commission, with many others, are involved in this major new effort in California to trying to be involved to identify what we're calling our renewable energy zones, and then get the resources developed, get the transmission lines addressed. There's a solar initiative in California that's basically $2 billion by 2017 to deliver almost 2,000 megawatts of solar. And this is really, the goal is to make rooftop solar more cost effective. This is a scheme in which we are start off with higher incentive payments to people who are installing the solar and then bringing it down over time, because we're trying to drive the cost of solar down in California so that it becomes cost effective without incentives. The third area is that fossil fuel generation. There is a state law, SB 1368, that sets emission performance standards for new resources, and this basically applies to new resources or to commitments under contract that are 5 years or more. My agency adopted the standard for the investor-owned utilities. We had a great working relationship with the Energy Commission, and they, by the law, were able to adopt the standard that applies to our municipal utilities. Very importantly, it applies to out-of-state power that is used to serve California. So this is an area where we are able to essentially address what is a major issue, the use of out-of-state power that is used here in California. This is really showing us the tremendous increase in investment that's going on for clean energy. When you look at the difference between 2007 and what's projected for 2017, you can see it's a very, very large growth area. So I will just conclude by saying, as I said at the beginning, think not just locally and within the state, but this is a really fascinating area to get into, to be involved with, because you're working on an international level. And that's really what it's going to take for all of us if we're going to address climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As most of you know, California's energy regulatory world is shared by a number of agencies. And we have representatives today from 2 of those agencies. And just to state something again that probably most people are aware of, the Public Utilities Commission is fundamentally the economic regulatory agency for the privately owned energy and gas utilities and other utilities in the state. So the PUC oversees the budgets and oversees all the programs for the regulated utilities. The California Energy Commission has a number of responsibilities, including siting thermal power plants, establishing, as Commissioner Grueneich said, building efficiency standards and appliance standards, and also in terms of allocating funds to investments in renewable energy sources, doing biennial comprehensive plan for including forecasts and development plans for energy in the state. So these 2 agencies have certainly in the last few years grown to work together very cooperatively. In addition to having Commissioner Grueneich here, we're very lucky to have Commissioner Karen Douglas, who is the most newly minted commissioner at the Energy Commission. She is filling a slot that's specifically designated for an attorney commissioner, but she comes to the job with a lot more credentials than that. She served as director of the California Climate Initiative at what was formerly known as the Environmental Defense. That was after it was known as Environmental Defense Fund, and before it was once again known as Environmental Defense Fund. And she also spent several years at the Planning and Conservation League in various capacities. She's also a graduate of, well, let me just say a different law school than this one that's sort of close by. And with that, please join me in welcoming Commissioner Douglas.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and very pleased to be on the Energy Commission. This is, as I will say later, but I might as well emphasize now, this is an incredibly exciting and important time to be doing this work, and it's a real privilege to be there and be part of the decision making and part of the policy making as California moves forward with the challenge of showing leadership and showing that we can deliver on our aggressive climate goals. I wanted to start this presentation, and I'm actually focusing much more on some of the challenges of California leadership and particularly the federal-state relationship as this leadership has evolved, because I think it's very, very, very relevant to how we proceed right now on the climate question. I wanted to start with a quote that someone at the Energy Commission gave me when we talked about this presentation. I didn't have a chance to ask her, the context in which it was said. But the quote's from Jimmy Carter, and he said, well, you know, whatever starts in California, unfortunately, has a tendency to spread, has an inclination to spread. And I didn't have time to say, well, what did he mean by unfortunately? And you know, what was he talking about exactly? But actually, as will be, I think, more clear as I go through some of my remarks today, there is a double-edged sword sometimes to the spread of California policy, and sometimes we wish it would spread faster and wish it would catch fire sooner, and other times, sometimes it turns around in interesting ways and affects us in ways we don't expect. And so I wanted to put some of those thoughts out there. The Energy Commission was established in 1974 by passage of the Warren-Elquist Act. And the overall goal of the commission is to ensure that our state's energy needs are met while protecting public health and safety and safeguarding environmental quality and the economy and state natural resources. And of course, I come from an environmental advocacy background and spent some 5 or 6 years, I think it was 6 years, lobbying and working as an advocate in Sacramento for 2 environmental groups right after graduating from the unnamed law school. And so I come at this from that background. I lobbied on AB 32. I was I was the lead lobbyist for one of the sponsors on that bill, and so I saw sort of the inside just of how that came together. And then sometimes I say, I think because I'm in Berkeley, I think I can use this word and not be entirely put into the or have everything I say discounted. But you know, to some extent, there is a measure of karma coming back to me now, if I can again use that word, being a public official and having to deal with these issues after so many years of being an environmental advocate and being out there saying, well, yes, we can, well, yes, we can, well, yes, we have to. And now I get to be part of helping figure out, well, how will we exactly? And it's not easy. But we have to do this. I mean, we really, really have to do this. And I wanted to start by giving just a brief overview. There are 5 things the Energy Commission does, primarily. Forecasting future energy needs and keeping historical energy data. And it's, I should say, because one of my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Boyd, would say it for me if he were here. It's not the California Electricity Commission, it's the California Energy Commission, and so we look at both transportation fuels and electricity. Licensing power plants, I'm on the siting committee. I will be also on committees reviewing particular power plant applications. It's, again, a really interesting position for me to be in because I come from, again, a background of environmental advocacy, and on one hand, it's very easy to respond with that by saying, well, why are we building more fossil fuel power plants? Why are we doing this? And on the other hand, there are important answers to that question in terms of system reliability and in terms of how we create a functioning electricity system that runs on much higher renewables than we have now. And I actually do believe that we need these new power plants. We need to retire old power plants. We will not succeed with our environmental programs if what we do turns the lights out in California, and we cannot turn the lights out in California. So we have to meet our state's energy and economic needs while achieving our environmental goals. And so I'm delighted, actually. I really enjoy the work on the siting committee. I'm also on the renewables and transportation committees. Some of the most important work that the Energy Commission has done since the passage of the Warren-Elquist Act, and one of the areas where we really see the good and the bad of the interaction with federal law, is in passage of building and appliance standards. Building standards are very important, and it's kind of obvious why they're important. Buildings, once built, stay in place for a long, long time, maybe 50 years or more. It's pretty inexpensive to put in efficient fixtures in buildings and to build buildings in ways that are energy efficient. It's quite expensive to retrofit those buildings and make them more efficient once they're already built, and there are some things you just can't do that wouldn't have been all that hard to do. And there's also a market failure, a very obvious market failure. You know, if anyone here has ever thought for a minute about real estate, someone will have said to you, you know, what's most important in real estate? You know, it's location, 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 right? I mean, and energy efficiency isn't one of those location, location, location. You know, I really think that's true, and there are some market failures that you don't solve. I mean, people care a lot more about where the building is than the fact that it's got green fixtures. I mean, green fixtures are nice if it's in the right place, but it's critically important that we have mandatory strong energy efficiency or building standards, and the Energy Commission updates standards regularly. It's an ongoing process. Coming to appliance standards, that's where the interaction gets pretty interesting. The Energy Commission's done appliance standards again for some 3 decades now, and standards passed by the Energy Commission have been national and international trendsetters. The Energy Commission joined with other states and NRDC in the mid-'80s to sue the federal government, largely to force the Department of Energy and force the federal government to start doing federal standards, because, as you saw from the graph that Commissioner Grueneich put up on the screen, we've managed in California, not exclusively, but in large part through our good work on the standards, to keep per capita energy use in California constant while it's just gone up and up and up in the rest of the country. And you know, if we had our standards in the rest of the country, we'd be a lot better off in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a very good thing to push for federal standards. And the other side of that, though, and the problem we've been having, is that manufacturers pretty quickly figured out that if the Energy Commission starts focusing on your product, you know, they go to Congress and they say, well, this is terrible. California's picking on us, and they're trying to force us to build the product one way, and it's ridiculous. We can't build it one way for California and another way for everyone else, and God forbid that we build it the same way for everyone, efficiently for everyone. And so they have, you know, consistently managed to get more and more appliances out of our reach through getting federal standards. And the federal standards are almost always based, at least in part, on California standards, but they're not updated very often. And in fact, in a later lawsuit that the Energy Commission brought against the Department of Energy with New York and some other states, we sued the Department of Energy for not keeping up with its statutory requirements for updating the standards. In some cases, they hadn't been updated in more than a decade. And so that was settled with a consent decree, and Department of Energy now has a schedule, but it had a schedule before. And so this, again, is an area where you've got to be vigilant. You've just got to make sure it's not enough to pass good standards. It's a matter of getting them implemented, and if there are supposed to be updates, getting them updated. And actually, I'll say something about that on the building side. We pass pretty good building standards at the Energy Commission. They could be more aggressive, but on the other hand, our job is to pass standards that apply for everyone and allow locals to be more aggressive. And so they aren't what you would call aspirational standards. They're really standards that are supposed to be things that everyone not only could do, but has to do. And so that's the approach, and that's the level of standards that we pass. And where that sometimes falls down is that they're not always enforced. We don't do the enforcement at the Energy Commission. We don't have an enforcement arm. It's local government doing the enforcement. Some of them are very good at enforcing. Some of them are not as good at enforcing the standards. And so one of the issues that the Energy Commission is thinking a lot more about is, once we pass our standards, to make sure it's something more than an intellectual exercise. How do we really make sure that buildings are being built in accordance with our standards, and when they're upgraded or when there are additions that trigger our standards, that those upgrades and those additions are done in conformance with them. That's more or less what I wanted to say about the standards. Again, they're very, very, very important. Consumers don't have all of the information that they need when they go out and pick out a washing machine or something, and it's quite important to have minimum standards on appliances. Another area where California has taken great leadership and which has triggered some very interesting discussion about the federal-state relationship in that leadership is the Renewable Portfolio Standard. the California, the CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, established the RPS. The Energy Commission, of course, had involvement and input and worked with collaborative staff at times and so on with the establishment of the Renewable Portfolio Standard. And it's a very important law. Its aim was really to create a market, create a requirement that utilities buy renewable power, because it wasn't happening enough. And we were having, the difficulty that it tried to overcome was to create a demand for renewable power. And we have the RPS. We've been working very hard as a state to reach the RPS. There are challenges to it. It looks like, while we are still full bore trying to meet the 2010 targets, it is looking less likely as time goes on that those targets will be met. There are, just a number of the challenges that people often throw out. Well, transmission, it's kind of a different challenge to do renewables, because you've got to generate the power where the renewable resources are and then bring it to where the people are. And so that means often a lot of power lines, and people don't like that through their neighborhoods, and it's hard to site, and it's hard to build, and so on. And so one issue is transmission. Environmental siting and permitting issues, and again, this is one where my environmental background is kind of fun for me, because now we're sort of thinking about, well, how do we site a bunch of concentrated solar generation in the desert? And how do we deal well with the issues of desert protection? And surely there are good places to build these things and bad places to build these things, but what's the right process, and what's the right way to engage people who care about the desert and don't just see it as dead land to put things on, because no one really sees the deserts that way anymore. I mean, they're quite important habitat, and the desert advocates have a very important voice in this. And so we've got real challenges in terms of how to build solar thermal, how to build wind power without causing harm to bird species that we don't want to harm. And there are better ways and worse ways of doing all of this. So there's siting challenges, there are cost issues, system integration issues. And system integration issues are an important one because of the way the electricity system works. I mean, the way it works is you flip a light switch and you expect the light to come on, and you turn your TV on and you expect the TV to come on. And people tend to, unfortunately, do all of this at the same time sometimes. And so that means that our system is what we call peaky. It's like at 5 o'clock, everyone gets home and they turn on the TV and the radio and they start cooking dinner and they run their wash. And so the system's way, way, way up here. And then at night when you're all asleep, it's way, way, way down here. And that happens to be when the wind blows. And so there are issues. And as long as we feel as though our job is to make sure that when you turn the switch, your appliance starts doing its thing, we have to deal with those issues. And so integrating renewables in a system where people have the reliability that they have come to expect and probably would be very upset if they didn't have is a real challenge. It's doable, but it requires thinking about the system in different ways. To go back to the federal-state issues, there's a lot of talk and a lot of interest in a federal renewable portfolio standard, because while some states have followed suit, not all states have followed suit. And in fact, in an earlier proposal, the federal RPS would have started at something like 2-point-something%. I mean, it would have started very low because some states have very, very, very little renewable power. Other states that we sometimes like to pick on, like Texas, actually are doing quite well. Texas has a tremendous amount of wind power. But there are some of the issues that come up with federal-state relationship and RPS are, first of all, the policy of, well, do you let a state have a more aggressive RPS than what the federal government's doing? And past versions of the bill have said, yes, of course you do. But that's issue number one. And then even if you say, sure, in concept we want states to have the ability to be more aggressive on the RPS, there is still a lot of ways to accidentally or purposely trigger what's called conflict preemption, where a court could find that the state program happens to frustrate implementation of the federal program because perhaps we have different reporting requirements, or we count this and they don't, and we, you know, and so actually integrating programs, even where you have the ability to do your own program that's more aggressive, is challenging. And then there's the question, and I'm going through this in some detail because it really parallels some of the issues we reach in the climate context. Then there's the question of what you do if California has a higher RPS requirement than the federal system, but does that mean that we allow our utilities to sell their excess RPS credits that they have because we made them in California to other states and reduce the compliance in other states? And if so, why do we bother? And, well, I mean, seriously, you know, if you're going to do that, just don't. And so anyway, these are issues that really came up and have come up and are going to come up in discussion of a federal RPS. And we want renewable energy to be nationwide. We don't want to be the exception. At the same time, we have an important leadership role. And so this is challenging. And that brings us to climate policy, where really it's kind of hardest of all. California's legacy of leadership in energy efficiency and renewables is critically important. It really is the reason why we passed AB 32. It was in large part because we, and as a lobbyist who worked on the bill, you know, we would go to people and we would say, you know, we did it for appliances, and here's where we did it, and we've done it for renewables, and we've done it here, and we've done it there, and this is the most important issue facing the global environment and our local environment. And it, you know, this threatens everything that we care about in the state, so let's do it again. And so AB 32 passed, and it requires we get down to our 1990 levels by 2020 and 80% below that by the 80% we didn't put in the bill. But the 2020 target's in the bill. The 80% target is in executive order. And how did we do it? Well, interestingly, what California did with AB 32 is much, much, much more both aggressive and comprehensive than other efforts around the world and in other states. The Europeans got ahead with the European trading system, and it's tremendously important that they did that, and we've learned so much from their experience doing it. There are very innovative programs being piloted in Europe, such as congestion pricing in London, such as carbon fees, demand response, and demand response and peak management measures that we can't even dream of here, that are just commonplace in France and other countries. And so we've got a lot to learn, but what we did that was so much more aggressive than what anyone else has done is pass an economy-wide cap. And that means transportation fuels. And so that's 40% of our emissions, and that's very hard. And it also means process emissions from our refining, and it means the chemical reactions that happen when we make cement. And then we made things even a little harder for ourselves by saying, and we're not just counting electricity generated in California, we're going to count electricity used in California. Because if the effect of our policy is to push us into more coal contracts from out of state, we haven't done anything. You know, why do it? In fact, please don't do it. And so, and so we had to, you know, we've really gotten ourselves to a point where we are trying to reduce the state's greenhouse gas footprint incredibly, and more importantly than that, and what I would say when asked, you know, well, why should California do this? You know, why should California do this? It's a global problem, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you say, well, first, we're a very important part of the problem. I mean, we are like a country. We're the 6th or 7th or 8th, depending on the day. Maybe with the housing crisis, it's less. But, you know, we're a large economy. We're, in terms of, compared to other countries in the world, we're one of the top economies. And our emissions are high. I mean, per capita, they're not as high as some other countries, but they're high relative to the rest of the world. And that's part of why we should do this. And the other reason we should do this, frankly, is because we are uniquely poised to be part of the solution. We've got this incredible history of environmental achievement, from air quality to energy efficiency and conservation and so on. We've got the institutions, we've got the experience to at least think that we might have a chance to succeed in solving this very difficult problem. We're the home to Silicon Valley and venture capital and green technology, and it's a thriving industry here. And since AB 32 passed, it's become a more thriving industry, and there's a real push here to innovate, and that's another important reason why California needs to lead, and why I think to make kind of that part of what I'm saying, is bring it to a point, we have a unique ability to be part of the solution, and we really can learn things by doing here that can be applied in the rest of the country, in the rest of the world. And so we've taken that responsibility upon ourselves, and we needed to, and I think we have the tools here to have success on that. There are, of course, other things going on within the United States. On the East Coast, there's an initiative called RGGI, which is a cap-and-trade system that's being developed between a number of eastern and northeastern states. There's the Western Climate Initiative, which is a very important west-wide initiative to, again, with California and some of our neighboring states, reduce emissions. And there's great talk and great pressure for a federal bill, and I hope there's one this year, and if there's not one this year, I hope there's one next year. And we just have to push, and we really need, of all issues, this is one that needs a national and an international policy. And again, though, we're going to have to look at how the federal bill interacts with what we're doing here. Because, and this is where I'll conclude, it's one thing to say there should be one national cap-and-trade market, and I think that's probably right, and we don't want to be the Republic of California with our own cap-and-trade currency and have an exchange rate with the national cap-and-trade currency or something like that. It would be kind of silly. But on the other hand, climate policy touches everything. Climate policy means land use, it means where we get our energy from, it means what kind of appliances are we allowed to buy if we want to buy an appliance. It touches, how far we drive, what kind of cars we have to buy, what kind of tires we can buy for our cars. My agency is doing energy efficiency standards for tires right now. And so if we are successful, you might get to buy better tires here than you do in other parts of the country. Although there's been some effort at preempting us, and so there's a bit of back and forth there. But where was I going with that? It touches everything. So we've got to watch very closely how a federal bill is structured to ensure that it does what we want, which is good national policy, so we're not the only ones out here doing this because we can't be or we will not succeed. And at the same time, it leaves us free to innovate in the way that we have for so many years, and with generally very good success. So that'll conclude my remarks since I am out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex Farrell expressed his regrets that he had to take off, but this is your opportunity. You've got a couple of the state's experts, a couple of the nation's experts on these issues here, and you're welcome to come up to the microphones and ask any questions that you want. And while you're thinking about that, let me pose a question. There aren't a lot of people who want to step forward right now and say that they aren't in favor of energy efficiency programs. But that doesn't mean that there's nobody who will do it. And there's a paper that just came out a few days ago written by a guy named Thomas Tanton, who argues that California's programs are great and everything, but they're really not applicable to the rest of the nation. And he had several arguments. First, he said, first it's the weather. We got this wonderful mild weather here that the rest of the country doesn't have that to deal with. Second, California doesn't have a robust manufacturing sector, so it doesn't have to deal with that higher end level of consumption. Third, he said that because of the fact that housing costs are so high in California, that there's a higher per capita occupancy rate in individual dwellings, and as a result of that, people have lower per capita consumption. But then finally, he argued that that flat consumption, as Commissioner Grueneich showed on the chart, that's great, but flat consumption is not reducing consumption. And that in reality, he says, since 1980, electricity consumption has gone up about 65% in California. And also, he said that coal-based generation has actually increased about 60%, according to his figures, as well during that period of time. So I think this kind of gets to the essence of what we're trying to do with this, in this discussion. How does California inform what happens in other parts of the country and other parts of the world? Or are we just lucky to be here and that's all there is to it?
Well, first of all, taking his last argument, which is because we have increasing population, we aren't really answering the question just by keeping per capita growth constant. I'd say that's a very strong argument for doing more, not less. And it is true that we do have milder weather here in California, but that then argues for it's actually more difficult to do energy efficiency here, and you've got great opportunities in the colder weather areas where you can get increased savings if you're putting in a cost-effective furnace, or if you have even hotter weather than we have here in California. Again, by looking at your air conditioners, you can have increased savings. The industry question is, in my mind, another non-starter. That one of the most interesting statistics, I think, is that if I spend a great deal of my time actually thinking and working on buildings, because even though we actually talk about the transportation sector, when you look at what does it take to build buildings and what does it take to then operate them, and you then examine what we call the embedded energy. How much energy does it take to produce the cement, to produce the windows? And then when you have the building built, what does it take in terms of your energy to heat or cool the building or light the building? What's the electricity or the gas from that? And then you translate that, which we call basically the embedded energy and the operational energy, into carbon. Buildings are accounting for about 50% of the carbon emissions in the United States. 50%. I think transportation is more on the level of 15, maybe at most, something under 20%. And that's why more and more we're focusing on buildings. So for the United States, industry is important, but unless you get it right with homes and commercial buildings and all of the other buildings in between, we don't have a prayer on where we're going in the commercial sector. So that's my rebuttal. Let them know we'll be happy to talk.
I'm convinced. All right. Commissioner Douglas?
I really don't have anything to add. I mean, we've been quite successful in California of taking care of some of the most cost-effective energy efficiency savings that are available. In all of these other states where these policies have not been in place, there are tremendous gains available, and there are still tremendous gains available here.
Thank you. Let's go to a couple of questions from the floor. First over here.
I want to thank the commissioners. Is this working? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
you're on.
Okay, great. I want to thank the commissioners for being here. Really appreciate the important work that you're doing. My name is Kristen Schwindt. I work with Bay Localize and the Local Clean Energy Alliance of the East Bay. And I was struck by one of the things that Commissioner Douglas said, is that you are legislating for the statewide context, and within the state, you have some localities that are moving ahead even faster than that, which can serve as a model even for the state, as we serve as a model for the rest of the nation. And we happen to be in one of those localities here in the Bay Area. We have San Francisco and now Oakland, Berkeley, and Emeryville, and various other places around the Bay Area. They're looking to move even faster than the renewable portfolio in trying to get to a point where we are producing and using up to 50% renewable energy by 2020. And the policy mechanism that they're looking to do this with is community choice aggregation, which is a policy that allows, for everyone else, communities, cities, or county governments to actually aggregate the demand of their consumers and do bulk purchasing of energy, and especially renewable energy, for these people. So you have the choice of buying your energy from PG&E or from the city or county. And this And according to the plan that San Francisco has, and now Marin County, Sonoma County, Berkeley, Oakland, and Emeryville are working on, and various cities in the Central Valley, they're looking at getting at renewable energy much faster than what the state can really mandate at this point. So what do you see as the role of more progressive localities in moving forward with this, and especially the role of community choice aggregation as a vehicle for doing that?
I'll take a stab at it. Under the state law, the Public Utilities Commission, our agency, basically runs the state's community aggregation program. I'm not aware that there's any equivalent concept if you're served by a municipal utility, like Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And we have adopted various rules that apply to local entities that are interested in going down this path of using community aggregation. So there is a way of doing it that we know that there are a number of cities that have been looking at it, and it is something that is legal to do in California, and you basically just go through the various steps if you want to do it. There is really a feeling that we want to make sure as people are moving into this area, if they do, that they are meeting the same requirements on energy efficiency and meeting the same requirements on renewables. So I was very happy to hear you talk about renewables. I hope there's the same emphasis on the energy efficiency, because they certainly both play the part. But it's something that is legally available, and as I said, we've set up what the rules are, so we're ready for any of the governments that want to come in and apply to actually undertake and implement it.
I'll say something just on the more general question, which is the role of local governments to do more than the state asks on a wide range of fronts. One of the things that I worried about a bit with AB 32, which was our state global warming law, is that there might be a perception, and I hope there is not this perception, that we're just going to solve the problem from Sacramento, so don't worry, nobody needs to do anything, and nothing could be farther from the truth. And we need local governments to be out pioneering and finding innovative ways to make things happen on the ground. In my last business meeting at the Energy Commission, we approved basically a waiver of Title 24 standards for a local government. I believe it was Santa Rosa, I'm not certain, but they came to us and they said, we want to do energy efficiency standards that are stricter than Title 24, and we looked at them, and yes, they were. And we said, okay, you can do it. So in their jurisdiction, they have tougher building standards, and that's one of the many things locals can do and local communities can do. The more, the better. It's very important.
Yes.
Hi, yes, just following up on ways that California has been able to impact actions in other states. Has there been any sign that SB 1368, which effectively prohibits California utilities from entering into long-term contracts with coal-fired power plants in other states, whether that has actually led to power plants not being built or renewable energy projects being proposed in their place?
I don't know that we have a specific example of a California utility that was specifically planning on building probably what would have been a conventional coal plant, and then canceling that and saying it was due to SB 1368. There are many coal plants. There's all sorts of reports coming out almost on a weekly basis about the large number of planned coal plants around the country that are being canceled, in large part because the investment community on Wall Street has said that they are now looking at carbon costs before they are approving major new investments, and that's having a major impact. I don't know, Karen, if you have any reports on a specific study or information on the impact of SB 1368. I'm not aware of one.
There have been some articles on the impact of 1368. I hesitate to give a number, but the passage of the bill was incredibly important. It sent a tremendous signal about coal that made Wall Street take notice and investors in coal take notice. And I believe that it has created a great hesitation in the West about investing in new large coal plants. And that's not a direct cause and effect line for a particular contract or a particular investor, but I think in general the message has been very much received.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Peter Colby. I've seen various numbers as to how much of California's energy use is related to the California Water Project and just moving the energy cost of moving water around. But clearly it's a tremendous amount of energy. Is anybody focusing specifically on that energy use and trying to reduce that?
Yes. 3 people here.
That's right.
You have Commissioner Douglas's agency, who did just a great report that luckily we read, that said that there's a lot of potential energy savings through water conservation. And then you have a terrific administrative law judge, Steve Weissman, who was at that time, well, maybe you still are, overseeing the docket. And then I was the lead commissioner. And collectively, we have now put in place a $10 million pilot, various different pilots and more studies, of which the goal is by the end of next year to see if we can have a reliable methodology to use for counting the energy savings from water savings. That's really what we have to do, is to know that there's some methodology, as I said, to count the energy savings from the water savings, because then we can start to allow it and make it a part of what our overall energy programs, to basically pick up the larger area of water. And then, of course, it will have a tremendous impact on how we're thinking about AB 32.
I'll just say a few more things. There is a water energy subgroup of the Climate Action Team, which is an interagency group that involves both of our agencies, Department of Water Resources and others, looking at ways to reduce the greenhouse gas impact of our water system. And those run from system changes that would maybe reduce the amount of water that we have to pump long distances or make the system itself more efficient, to things like end-use efficiency. And frankly, end-use efficiency is where a lot of the energy use actually is. It's not only heating water, but it's in the energy used to pressurize water delivery systems at local areas and get water to your house, get water to your faucet, and so on. The Energy Commission for a long time has dealt with water efficiency in our appliance efficiency standards, both hot water, where there's an obvious energy connection, and cold water, where the energy connection is more about embedded energy and the energy in the effort to get the water to the consumer's appliance or building. There's been recent legislation. There's considerable interest on in this topic in the legislature. There's been recent legislation clarifying our authority to go after water efficiency for pure water savings alone. And so I think this is another area where a lot of people are focused right now.
Well, I apologize for not being able to give the warning, one-question warning, but we really unfortunately need to wrap up the panel now. I want to... sorry?
2 fast questions.
Yeah. Well, all right. We're going to try. You got a yes or no question. Why don't you give a quick try?
I'll try to phrase it that way. I'm Jim Wigan from the Bureau of Land Management. Commissioner Douglas expressed concern about the kind of energy development in desert ecosystems in California. And I'm wondering if any of the panelists think that there might be some novel ways to harmonize the goals or desired energy development desired by the state, and how that might be better harmonized with federal objectives.
Well, I think the programmatic EIR the Bureau of Land Management is doing to begin to analyze in advance the impacts of concentrated solar development in the desert is a good start. I would like to see in the California desert a very robust effort at identifying where solar projects should go so that we are able to make sure that we get transmission there and so on. And so I think more needs to be done in that area.
And that's precisely why we started READY, this renewable project, because we realized we needed to focus very much on where should those areas be for the renewable development. And but there's still a lot to be done. I mean, even though we've been talking renewables for years, once you get into it, you realize the actual serious looking at where are the areas to be developed, what's the protection that we're going to need to do, and what does that translate into specific plants being built and how to build them, and the transmission line. I think it's something we all wish we'd started 10 years ago, and we're trying to play catch up now.
All right, you got us hooked. We'll take a couple more questions. Anybody else have a question? Yeah, why don't you come up, please? Please come up to one of the microphones. Actually, it looks like there's only one now. Okay,
up to the empty microphone.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think this gentleman was waiting ahead. If you want to go first, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, my name is Chris Peterson. I have two competing questions in my mind, or unrelated questions. You take your pick.
Take our pick.
First question relates to sort of a land use related question. The areas of the state where growth is projected to occur fastest in the coming decades are also the areas of the state that tend to be the hottest parts of the state. What are your thoughts about what effect that has on energy demand? Will things like improved building standards, efficiency standards be sufficient to address that? Or do you think the state should also be looking at issues like affecting the location of new developments?
The move to hotter areas is an incredible challenge in terms of our peak demand, both our peak water demand and our peak energy demand. It's makes things a lot harder. I don't know that we can, I mean, if we get to zero energy homes, presumably we've compensated for that, but it's harder in areas where the weather is more extreme.
And with climate change, we're going to be seeing it increasingly. But I'm not aware of any mega effort that says let's actually start on a large scale trying to influence from a state government effort where people literally are going to be moving and building. We're ambitious, but I don't know that, that we're that ambitious.
We're looking at things like land use planning, but I think we're taking the location of cities as a given and talking about how people plan within those cities and those populations. I don't think we're talking about a massive move back to the coast effort.
And the other question was,
we'll go back.
The other question was about LNG. There are a lot of proposals for new LNG ports. Good idea, bad idea, in between?
In the state's energy action plan, it does endorse liquefied natural gas, but does not take a position on any particular project. And the Public Utilities Commission, my commission, used to have jurisdiction over those, and there was a move afoot that was successful to take away basically state jurisdiction. And you were involved, Steve. Did anybody end up with the jurisdiction? Literally. I know that our agency lost it.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission now has jurisdiction over LNG facilities that are sited onshore. But it's kind of an ironic breakdown, because if it's an offshore facility, then the governor of the nearby state has veto power. So it's kind of a strange combination right now. There's a related question having to do with LNG. Liquefied natural gas clearly has a larger carbon footprint than domestic gas. You have to devote energy to liquefaction and to transportation and to regasification. So to what extent are either of your agencies trying to deal with that issue? If we are, as a state, are promoting LNG use, what about the fact that it's actually going to be increasing the natural gas footprint?
I don't know that I don't know that I would say that our state is promoting LNG use so much as our state is promoting our state is grappling with how we meet our needs for petroleum and for natural gas going forward. This is part of our energy supply infrastructure. I think the effort to do life cycle accounting at ARB for the low carbon fuel standard will help begin to create a methodology for judging when gas extraction or for judging and actually accounting for differences in the carbon content of fuels that are basically the same fuel, but come from different places or were processed in different ways and so on. It's an incredibly challenging task, though, to do that.
All right, you had a question?
I was just wondering to what extent nuclear power was being considered as expanding within your commissions and its regulation.
I started off my career 30 years ago at the Energy Commission as an attorney, working on what was then the state's brand new nuclear power plant laws, and they are still the law in the state that basically it is not permitted under law to construct the Energy Commission cannot give a permit for a proposed new nuclear power plant unless there is a I've forgotten the exact term after 30 years, but basically a demonstrated federal repository for the permanent disposal of radioactive waste. And I'm pretty sure I can say with utter confidence that 30 years later, there is no ability to make that determination, just as there was not an ability to make it 30 years ago. That was litigation that went up to the United States Supreme Court, arguing that it was a state law that was preempted because it was a safety law, and only the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission has jurisdiction. The state successfully defended the law, saying that it was correctly within the state's interests in terms of reliability of power and economics, looking at the cost. And that was a 9-0 decision, so it looks like it was a pretty robust decision. So the bottom line is that you could only build new nuclear power plant within the state of California if those laws were repealed by the California legislature. There was a bill that was introduced this year or last year. The author abandoned it, and it's hard to predict, but I would tend to say that's probably not the first thing on this legislature's mind to repeal those laws.
I would agree with that.
You've been very patient. I think it's time to thank our panel members. Please stay with us for a minute if you would. But, thank our panel members for both an extremely rich and interesting discussion, and also for being there to help us out through these enormous challenges we were facing as time goes ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, panelists. A couple of scheduling announcements. Tomorrow, we're going to begin bright and early with the delicious breakfast for you from 7:30 to 8:30, and we will start the substantive program promptly at 8:30. We will continue the theme of energy policy when we hear from our opening speaker tomorrow morning, Dr. Steve Chu, director of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory here at Berkeley and Nobel Prize winner in physics. I'm looking forward, as I'm sure you are, to an equally stimulating program tomorrow on multiple topics. Our day is not quite concluded. The formal presentations are at an end, but we hope you will continue the discussion in an informal setting. We have a reception for you that is hosted through the generosity and good graces of the law firm of Morrison & Forster. Peter Schauf, partner in that firm, gave a very thoughtful green chemistry presentation as part of a panel earlier today, a Bolt grad, and we're delighted to have Peter back. His firm, Morrison & Forster, has been a great friend and supporter of the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy for some time, and we're delighted that their generosity continues to hosting the reception that follows now. To get there, you just go out the hall and into the lobby. There is a staircase that goes up one level, and the reception will be held up there. I look forward to meeting many of you informally, and please continue the discussions. Have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow morning, no later than 8:30 right here at booth. Thank you.